Hi, everybody. So today we're going to be working on factoring with grouping. So if you look at our overall polynomial here, our four-termed polynomial, um, we don't really have any common factors. You'll notice there's v's on the first three, but not the last one. The last two are divisible by 5, but the first two aren't. And the first two are divisible by 4, but the last two aren't. So what we're actually going to do when we come up with against a problem like this is to factor by grouping. So I'm going to go ahead and because I noticed that the first two are factored into 4, I'm going to make them a group and the second two factor by 5. So I'm going to make them into a group. And it's very, very important that you notice here that I left out the subtraction sign because I don't want the subtraction in the middle of my problem. I don't want it with my variable here. So I'm going to leave it outside the parentheses. And that means that when I do create my groups, my parentheses, I'm going to have to change this positive to a negative so that it's a negative 5v minus a negative 15, which is 5v plus 15. So let me go ahead and write that out, parentheses. So now you see I have 4v cubed minus 12v squared. And from that, I'm subtracting the entire group 5v minus 15. So don't forget to change that sign to a negative. So with these two, in this parenthetical, my first group, the red group, I want to find the common term. And in the blue group, I want to find the common term. And I want to take those out. So let's go ahead and look at this first group. You'll notice that, like I said, 4 is divisible by 4. And negative 12 is divisible by 4. And as 4 is equivalent to 4, that's going to be our greatest common factor. So we don't even have to look any further. We know that we are going to pull out sum 4. So now let's look at our v's here. We have a v cubed and a v squared, which means that each of our terms has two v's multiplied together, has a v squared. If you are confused by this or you don't remember how we do GCF, feel free to ask me any questions, or there are some other videos that you can work on. But altogether, we're going to pull out a 4v squared from that parenthetical. And all that's left, 4v cubed divided by 4v squared gives me just a v left over. And negative 12v squared divided by 4v squared is a negative 3 left over. So I'm going to get 4v squared times v minus 3 from my first group. So 4v squared is the common factor in the first group. And what's left over is this v minus 3. Okay, moving on to our second grouping, we have 5v minus 15. All right, and it's very clear, again, 5 is what we're going to take out of this, a 5. And you'll notice that only one term has a v, so we don't really need to worry about v. So I'm going to go ahead and pause and draw this out. So as you can see here, I have 4v squared times v minus 3, and from that I'm subtracting 5 times v minus 3. And you'll notice why it was so important that I take out that negative, because v minus 3 and v minus 3 are the same thing. It shows up in both groupings. And I needed to make sure that it was v minus 3, not a positive 5 times negative v plus 3. It's just going to show up better if I take that subtraction sign out of my second grouping. So scrolling down, the way that I'm going to rewrite this, because I have v minus 3 being multiplied, I'm going to put it in its own parentheses, and then I'm going to multiply that by 4v squared and by negative 5. And the way I'm going to do that is by just putting those other two leftover terms into a parenthetical. So once they're in these parentheses, as we know, when you distribute, it's going to go v to 4v squared, v to negative 5, negative 3 to 4v squared, and negative 5 by negative 3. This means that this term is being multiplied by v minus 3, and this term is being multiplied by v minus 3, so it means the exact same thing. I should be able to, at any point, simplify out my equation and go all the way back to the beginning here. It should always be mathematically equivalent statements, or we've made a mistake. So this is how you're going to finish with factor with grouping, and that is so much easier than trying to use our square if we have a lot of variables, if we had a v squared. So moving on to our second example, here you'll notice that it's reminding you level 4 is going to be demonstrating the relationship between factoring and the distributive property. We just talked about that, but go ahead and, if you want, pause the video, take a second to think about it. But our first group is going to be 49x cubed minus 35x squared. Our second group in blue is going to be 56x minus 40. And you'll notice this time we don't really need to worry that much about the sign in the middle because it's positive. So we're not going to have to change anything. We're just going to add two parentheticals together. So here we have it written out as our first group plus our second group. You'll notice we didn't have to change the sign this time. It's still a negative 40 because we didn't have to worry about that subtraction. So I'm just going to scroll down, give us a little more room. And let's look at our 49 and negative 35. 49 and negative 35. Together, the only thing they have in common, or the greatest thing they have in common, is going to be a 7. And I'm kind of cheating a little bit because I know that 49 is the square root of 7. So it's most likely going to give us something easy to work with. That's 7 and x squared. When I take 7x squared from 49x cubed, I get 7x left over. And when I take 7x squared out of the negative 35x squared, I'm left with just negative 5. So my first group factors pretty easily. I take out the 7x squared, and that is being multiplied. To go backwards, I would have to multiply this, distribute it out, and multiply it by 7x minus 5. So now looking at my second parenthetical that I'm adding, I have 56 and negative 40. This is a little difficult to see, but I'm going to give you the hint that you are going to look at, or you can look at, the terms in here. Because theoretically, we want to see this parenthetical again. We want to see 7x minus 5 show up over here. So you can even go ahead and write that out, 7x minus 5. And that is going to be multiplied by some mystery number. So to find it, what would I multiply by to get 56x from 7x? To get, what do I multiply here? That's an easy question. It's going to be an 8. And it should also mean that 8 times negative 5 is negative 40 here. And indeed, that is true. So I'm going to go ahead and, just like we did before, 7x squared plus 8, each of these terms that's being added together is also being multiplied by 7x minus 5. So I'll show you how we're going to go ahead and rewrite that. All right, perfect. Again, we have 7x squared plus 8, each of those terms multiplied by 7x minus 5. In here, moving on to our last example, again, don't forget that level 4, that understanding of what we're doing, right? That we're going back and forth. But here we're going to split into the first two again and the second two. But this time, again, we have to look at the subtraction sign and make sure we don't lose that in the process. So let's go ahead and write out those parentheticals. My 6y cubed minus 21y squared, that's not going to change because it's the first term. But since the second term is being subtracted, you'll go ahead and see how that changes. That 6y cubed again, didn't change, but the negative 16y plus 56 that you saw up here turned into the opposite of that. So a positive 16y minus 56. So again, you're just doing the opposite of the two terms up here because you're subtracting those terms. Perfect. So from our 6 and negative 21 on the left-hand side, sorry about that, left-hand side, we are actually going to pull out a 3. You might get tricked and think it's a 6, but 6 does not go into 21. Only 3 is the largest number that goes into 21, and 6. It's our greatest common factor. And as usual, we have our y squared taken out. And when you take those out, you should be left with a 2y and a negative 7. From that whole thing, we are subtracting. And the common factor between our 16 and negative 56, again, you can do your little trick and write out. We know we're going to want a 2y minus 7. And so if I divide 16y by 2y, I know that I'm on the outside going to get an 8, right? 8 times 2y here, 8 times 2y should give me 16y. 8 times negative 7 should give me negative 56. And then all the way back up to our answer. And lastly, we are going to rewrite these as factors, as products. So we have them written as they're going to be subtracted from each other. But now we want to write it as what is multiplied. We only want things that are going to multiply. So 3y squared minus 8 times 2y minus 7. So awesome job. Thanks for watching. Continue on with your lesson. And if you have any questions at all as you move into your practice, as you try several times and do some of your quizzes, just keep plugging on.